Bob Sagendorf, 1320 News. Hour 1 now, Talk of the Town. Your host, Larry Rifkin.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Right.
And we have a wonderful joint appearance by the Republican candidates in the 5th Congressional District. They are all in front of me. And you're listening to this, of course, and perhaps watching it on CTN, on 1320 WATR and WATR.com. This is Talk of the Town. I'm the host, Larry Rifkin, and we're on every day from 10 until 1. An exciting program today, including an exchange between the two candidates in the Democratic Party for Secretary of the State later on. But I want to welcome to our microphones and to the audience here in Connecticut, Justin Bernier, who is running for the office of Congressman, Sam Caligiuri, and Mark Greenberg. And I want to thank you all for coming by today. And we do welcome CTN to our studios. This is more of a joint appearance than a debate. And we have some very, very simple rules that will prevail. Be as brief as you can so that the listeners and I can ask as many questions as possible. No filibustering. That will come later when you all go to the Senate, I guess. If you are a bit long-winded, expect a gesture from me that will be G-rated and appropriate for both TV and radio audiences. So, but I don't expect that to happen. I've interviewed all of you, and you can be very succinct, particularly at this point in the campaign. You've gotten to that point. I ask each caller to ask questions of all the candidates, not for one or another. I know there may be partisans who call in, but we're not here to pump up or deflate any candidacies, but rather to elicit answers to help you make a determination in a couple of weeks. If in the course of an individual responding to a question, you feel compelled to offer a response, please raise your hand, and I will give each of you a chance to continue the dialogue on that issue. Otherwise, we'll just move on to another question. We will take just a brief commercial break as necessary. And to start off, I'd like each of you to start by giving us roughly a 90-second snapshot of who you are and why you should be the Republican nominee. There will be no closing statements, and I'll start left to right, not politically, but here in the studio as I see you before me, and then we'll move. So the next response will come first from Sam Caligiuri, but we start with Mark Greenberg. Mark?
Thank you very much, Larry. Larry, there's a clear difference between the other candidates and me. I have been in business for over 35 years, creating hundreds of jobs. Meeting payroll, I've done it. Unlike the federal government, balancing budgets, I've done it. Paying health care premiums for employees, I've done it. I alone have signed my name on the front of paychecks each week for over 35 years. My opponents, on the other hand, have spent their careers in government and would like to for a long time to come. I, on the other hand, have spent my career in business, and I intend to spend limited time in Washington, do my civic duty, then come back home to my young family and business. If you believe Washington is broken and needs real change, then I am your candidate. I will bring an outsider business perspective and sanity to Washington.
Okay, Mark Greenberg. Sam Caligiuri.
Great. Good morning, Larry, to you and to your listeners, and thank you so much for doing this. You know, the three of us have been talking to audiences for a long time. This is one of the most important races in the state that we've had in a long time, and one of the most important races in the country, because this country is heading in the wrong direction. We're heading in the wrong direction in terms of spending. We're heading in the wrong direction in terms of jobs policies. And Chris Murphy has been part of the problem from day one. And it's time to make the correction that we need to get federal spending under control so that we can start growing jobs again. The people in this region know I have never been afraid to stand up and fight for what I believe in, whether it was being the only senator and the only Republican in the General Assembly to say no to the 2007-2009 state budget because I predicted it was going to result in massive deficits, and that was only going to make it harder for us to grow our economy, or whether it was the tough contracts that I negotiated when I was the acting mayor of Waterbury that started to turn this city around financially, or the other tough decisions that I've made over the years. I have always stood up for what I believe is right, and that's what I want to do as the 5th District Congressman. Congressman, when I get elected in November, with help from people from this region and throughout the district. We have a chance to get back on the right track, and I want to be part of putting this country back on the right track. That's why I'm so proud to be the Republican nominee, having won the endorsement at the convention with nearly 70% of the vote. That's why I'm so proud to have represented this region. Everything I've done for this region over the years, I want to do for them as their member of Congress. That's why I'm happy to be here, and I'm asking for their vote on the August 10th Republican primary.
Okay, that was Sam Caligari. Justin Bernier, why are you best suited for this position?
Well, thank you, Larry. Justin Bernier here. I have got background both in government. That's right, I have worked in government. I'm not ashamed of that. I've done some great work there. We helped save the submarine base, and we got armaments and the correct gear that our troops need in Iraq. I'm a veteran of Afghanistan from 2007, so I know what our folks need out there. I also have, though, a background in the private sector and a background in economics. I'm the only person in this race with both a background in economics and national security. This race, if Republicans are going to win it, has got to be about the future of America, not politics, not personalities. I'm the only one in this race who is talking about a comprehensive plan for bringing prosperity back to this country. The way we're going to do that is by bringing taxes down and spending down, getting the cost of health care down, and getting the cost of energy down. If we do those three things, and we work hard at it, and we make sure that we get this budget deficit under control, this country is going to take off again. Right now, Americans have a feeling in their pit of their stomach that things are going in the wrong direction. They feel that the country is sliding away, and the politicians aren't addressing those problems. They're telling us that that we're going to have a jobless recovery, and that we should be happy with that. And to me, a jobless recovery is like a foodless meal. It's like a roofless house. It doesn't make any sense. So until we get these guys out of the way and put people down there that actually push for pro-growth policies, we're not going to have recovery.
Okay, 203-757-1320. If you have a question for all of the candidates, and I'd like to contain it to the issues, then please feel free to get in line right now. Let me just start off by asking, Republican candidates for Congress across the country are focused on deficit reduction. In specific, please give our listeners the programs or the expenses that you would like to reduce or stop the rate of growth, eliminate, downsize, or privatize, and be as specific as you can. I'll start with Sam. I'm sorry, because Mark started the first round.
Sure. Getting the deficit under control and really getting federal spending under control is the first step in turning our economy around, because it's the only way that we can reasonably and responsibly cut taxes, which we need to do in a broad-based manner in order to really jumpstart our economy. That's the only time-proven way of stimulating economic growth, not this kind of phony stimulus that Chris Murphy and Nancy Pelosi have supported. I would tackle it in a few different ways. Number one, I would make sure that the stimulus doesn't become a permanent part of the federal budget. The next thing I would do is advocate an agency-by-agency review where we eliminate the duplication of programs. There are hundreds of overlapping economic development programs alone that could be consolidated. But we need to do the hard work of agency-by-agency review to eliminate waste, duplication. The third thing, and it's a major structural change, but we need to do it, is to put tough, enforceable spending caps in place on the entire federal budget. Whether this federal budget was run by Republicans or Democrats, the Congress has been unwilling and unable to say no to spending we can't afford. And that's why I've been a strong advocate of putting tough, enforceable spending caps in place on the entire federal budget, so that in addition to the things that we talked about to start reducing the deficit, we can control spending as well.
Okay. Justin Bernier.
Yeah, we've got a debt right now, $14 trillion, and my daughter Renee was born just a month ago, and she came out screaming bloody murder, and I thought to myself, well, she knows she's already $42,000 in debt. That's her share of the debt. The only way we're going to get out of this hole is by a joint effort at cutting spending at the same time that we're cutting taxes to promote growth, because we have to grow our way out of this problem. We're only growing right now at about 1.5%. We need to get to 3%, 3.5%. What I want to do is bring government levels back to 1997 levels for starters, spending levels, and let's cut back from there. But we've got to also get the business tax down. Right now we have the second highest business tax in the entire industrialized world, and it's going to be number one in January when Japan cuts its rate. We're 30% higher than we were in the mid-90s. That's got to come down. I want America to be a place where businesses are coming to, not leaving. leaving. I want them coming here for lower taxes, not leaving because they can't pay their bills.
Okay, Mark Greenberg.
Well, we have to create jobs. That's the most important job. Creating jobs is done by giving an environment where businesses and employers know that there'll be stability going forward in the future, where they know that the tax code will not be fooled around with on a regular basis. In talking to the folks day by day as I walk around these neighborhoods, folks are not prepared to make a commitment to new employees because they're so uncertain about the stability of this government. Steve Wynn just recently, 2 days ago, stated that Macau, China, had a more stable political environment than the United States. I saw that interview on TV and I was shocked. What we have to do is create stability. What we have to do is create an environment where people will be optimistic about the future. We have to cut taxes. The first way we could do that is by extending the Bush cuts that went into effect. If we don't extend that, that will be de facto the largest tax increase in United States history. That's a necessity. JFK did that. Ronald Reagan did that. And then, of course, there is duplication of programs and departments that must be ended. We have to look at those things very, very seriously. 1%, 2%, 3% cuts won't work. We're talking about a 10, 15, 20% cut in a lot of these programs and departments.
Justin Bernier, since we're on the issue of the Bush tax cuts, the Republican majority, when it was in, decided not to make them permanent. Where are you on the issue of permanency and as it relates to whether there's any one of the tiers that should go up while the others stay the same? Do you see this again as a temporary extension of these cuts or a permanent one? I'll ask all of you.
I won't vote for a tax increase of any kind. We don't have a tax revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And in fact, what we need to do is not just extend these tax cuts, but also enact new ones. We need to get the capital gains taxes down. I'd like to bring the business taxes down, and let's get rid of the death tax because it's absolutely destroying family businesses. And those are who are going to be hiring people in this economy. Unfortunately, the Democrats have made this about a haves versus have-not issue. It isn't that way. It's whether or not we're going to grow this economy. And America is ready to turn the corner on this. People are ready to get back to work. But businesses, the first step to creating those jobs is to be able to invest. They need money to invest to expand their businesses and create jobs, and that's where these tax cuts come in.
Okay, Mark Greenberg, permanent, and do you have any differentiation among the various income tiers? And should they be permanent or just another temporary extension?
Well, now that you talk about the tax code is ridiculously absurd and complex. We could talk for hours about the tax code. The tax code has to be fixed completely. It's broken. There are loopholes galore in it. I would be for a fair tax system, which basically would eliminate the income tax completely, so long as income tax would be dissolved completely. But absent that, we have to have perhaps a flat tax. We have to get rid of a lot of the loopholes. But for the near part, at least, let's reduce these taxes. Let's let the businesses know that they're not coming back quickly and that they have an environment of growth with lower taxes.
Sam Kelliger.
Yeah, let me answer your question directly. I would support making the Bush tax cuts permanent, not temporary. The uncertainty that business people have out there that Mark referred to is exactly right. If we make them a temporary extension once again, the time will come when there will be anxiety again about what's going to happen. We're going to be reliving the moment in time that we're going through right now. We ought to make the Bush tax cuts permanent so that businesses and individuals can know exactly where they stand, so that some of the capital that they're holding on to, that we need to reinvest in the economy, that employers need to reinvest into hiring more people again, hiring more, buying more equipment, investing in R&D. All of that is being chilled by the fact that nobody knows what's going to happen in part with these tax cuts. Let's make them permanent. That's my direct answer to your question.
Okay, let's go back to Mark Greenberg. And let me ask you, conversely, when we've talked about things to cut, aside from defense, and the military, because I think that will be the general answer of what we preserve. I was reminded today that even in the state of Connecticut, where not necessarily that this is the best public policy, but we have supplanted a lot of state funds with stimulus dollars to fund our state education monies. So if the stimulus is not permanent, then we have a 15% hole there. What are the programs of the federal government that you want to preserve, protect, and perhaps even add to? Because we do have a government, we do have needs. So aside from cutting, what are the things that are working that you want to go down there and make certain they continue to press on for the people of America?
Well, as you know, Larry, I'm a strict constitutionalist. I believe in the Constitution. I carry it generally in my pocket. I believe that the federal government should be limited, that the federal government has an obligation to protect our borders and to protect its citizens. That's job one of the federal government, and to preserve a strong currency. Beyond that, the 10th Amendment comes into play. And the 10th Amendment, as you know, preserves these obligations to the state government, and then perhaps even further down the chain to the local governments. That's the best way I can answer your question.
Sam Caligiuri.
Well, if I remember your question, it was which programs do we think we ought to protect? And I think we ought to protect national defense, Social Security, and Medicare. People are relying. First of all, national security is one of the few functions that only the national government can perform. It is one of the most important functions the national government can perform, and we need to make sure they do it to the best of their ability. Social Security and Medicare are programs on which tens of millions of people are relying on every day, like my 74-year-old mother. So we need to make sure that we're preserving funding for those programs for people who are using it now. Now, for long-term sustainability, we need to, for younger people, move into a more realistic and sustainable model. But in the short term, we need to make sure that we're protecting Social Security, we're protecting Medicare, we're protecting national defense. One of the problems with the health care bill that Chris Murphy passed was the cuts in Medicare that a lot of seniors are going to experience, not to mention the increased taxes. So those are things we need to be protecting.
Justin Bernier.
Larry, back in the mid-'90s, you never heard anyone say, I wish we had some more federal government. I think we can go back to mid-'90s levels temporarily and then start peeling it back even further. And we're not going to see a lot of belly aching from real people out there. You may have some bureaucrats complaining. When the Obama administration took over back in 2009, it increased every single department by 15 to 25%. So right off the bat, we ought to cut that funding. Now, in terms of what could be, what I think we actually need to put more resources into, veterans funding. The Veterans Appropriations Bill is the very last bill signed into law every year. It ought to be the first. And if you talk to veterans out there, they'll tell you they're not being funded at the VA adequately, and those veteran programs that they've been promised, a lot of them are being scaled back, and people aren't getting access to them. So we got to make sure, first and foremost, we take care of our veterans, and also let's make sure we're cutting back to those 1990 levels and even earlier.
Okay. Before we take a break, and then we're going to take the telephone calls that we have, and we'll take more at 203-757-1320. If you consider the last 18 months a disaster, which I think those of you arrayed here are here for that reason in part, it has been a frenetic one. Healthcare, stimulus, Wall Street reform, student loan, federal involvement. What has to be repealed, reformed, or left alone? Where do you begin? Because as you suggested, there's been a lot of activity that has grown the government by a substantial amount even over this recent 18 months. Where do you begin, Sam Caligiuri?
Yeah, well, let me start with two. We need to repeal Obamacare and the federal takeover of health care that Chris Murphy and Nancy Pelosi supported and fought for so passionately. It's the wrong way to do health care reform. We need to do health care reform. That was the wrong way to do it. We also need to repeal the stimulus, because the stimulus bill did nothing to grow our economy. All it did was grow the size of the federal government, which is already at a size we can't afford. So those are two things that we need to repeal, turn around. Not because we don't need to do health care reform, not because we don't need to stimulate the economy, but because there is a better way to do those things than what Chris Murphy and Nancy Pelosi have been advocating. And that's where I'm going to start when I get to Washington.
Okay, Justin Bernier.
Yeah, we've made the health care issue number one issue for us. We need tort reform, no doubt about it, and we need serious health care reforms. I would also look to repeal cap and trade. The cap and trade energy bill is going to really increase costs for all products that use energy to be manufactured in all households. So those are two big bills I think we ought to work on repealing. On the health care issue, we got to put forward meaningful common sense reforms that lower costs and expand access to care. And, finally, just in general, we've got to repeal this mentality that America can't compete. The politicians are telling us we can't compete because we're in a global economy. Well, we've always been in a global economy, and America's always done great. The reason why we're having problems now is because we have politicians in the way putting forward these bills, cap and trade, health care, taxes that are preventing us from really getting the job done.
Okay, just to be clear, cap and trade has not gone through both houses, and
that's right. It's been through the House, but we know that there's also a lot of regulations they're working on over at EPA to try to make it a de facto bill.
Okay, let's go to Mark Greenberg, and then we'll take a break, and then we've got all of our lines busy to ask you all questions.
Yes, Larry, I consider myself the repeal candidate. I would repeal Obamacare. I would repeal the stimulus plan and pay down the deficit with the unused money. I would also repeal the most recent disaster, which is the banking reform bill. Basically, my feeling is that if it's over 700, 800, 900 pages, it should be shredded immediately. So I'm the repeal and the shred candidate.
Okay. It is now 30 minutes after the hour, and a very quick 30 minutes has gone by. And we have got Bill and Kate and another gentleman on the telephone. We'll get to all of you in just a moment here on WATR's Talk of the Town. And we welcome CTN to our studios today. This is a debate, or a joint appearance, if you will, among the 5th Congressional District Republicans who are vying for the seat currently occupied by Chris Murphy. 1320 WATR, this is Talk of the Town. I'm Larry Rifkin. And across from me, arrayed here, are the 5th congressional candidates for the Republican Party, and they're vying for the seat currently occupied by Chris Murphy. And you see Mark Greenberg, you see Sam Caligieri, and Justin Bernier. And now we're going to the telephones. Kate from Waterbury. Kate, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Cal. I have a question for all of them, and that is that I've seen so many of these really negative ads coming out, particularly right now with the governor's race. So, fighting again internally inside the party. And I was wondering, how are you running your campaigns? Are you focusing on each other, or are you focusing on winning and beating Chris Murphy?
Okay. Thank you very much, Kate. And let's start with Justin Bernier.
Well, we're focusing 90% on Chris Murphy, but there's big differences between some of us as candidates, and those ought to be put out there, so voters can make a decision, especially on things like voting records. So, but we decided very early on we were going to run a very positive campaign, because I believe that Americans, they want to see the future of America talked about, not politics. I mean, this race, if Republicans are going to win it, it's going to be about talking about what this country is going to look like in 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road, not about personalities, not about a lot of these political issues that have just divided us as a country over the past 20 years. So we've made a very strong point of talking about the future of America in our materials.
Mark Greenberg.
Well, in our materials, we talk mostly about Chris Murphy and the disastrous direction that his votes and Obama and the triumvirate down in Washington have participated in. We have come out with a commercial which deals with contrast, but we don't emphasize that. We emphasize that we'll be better in the future than Chris Murphy.
Well, I'm very proud that I'm the only candidate in this race who has literally mentioned no one other than Chris Murphy. I have gone on the attack 100% against Chris Murphy and not against these other two fine gentlemen. And that's the way I'm going to run this race, because I think we are much better served focusing our attention on Murphy and not on one another. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's the right way to spend our resources. I've said all along, if I can get through this primary and the only person I ever talk about is Chris Murphy, I will have been successful. These guys, to the extent that they've done attacks, the only person they've attacked is me. That's much better placed on Chris Murphy. But you know what? I'm a big boy. It comes with the territory. I'm going to run my campaign in a way that stays focused on Murphy, not these other fine gentlemen.
Okay, Justin Bernier, I did say at the beginning that if there was anything that elicited an additional comment, you could weigh in briefly. Yes.
Yeah,
you can as well.
We got to be fair about this also. there's plenty of newspaper articles saying where you've been quoted talking about the other candidates in the race. So we got to be fair here. I think it's okay for us as candidates to talk about what differentiates us, because right now that's what the listeners are looking for. They want to know what's the difference between Justin Bernier, Sam Caligieri, and Mark Greenberg. And so we have to tell the voters what that difference is. Now, it needs to be done in a very respectful way and in a positive way, and frankly in a way that's going to allow whoever comes out of this race to defeat Chris Murphy. I agree with you on that, Sam, 100%. But we also need to be fair here. We've been in public forums that have been on television. We've talked to reporters. There has been a lot of back and forth between the candidates.
Well, let me ask you then, since we're in this, we might as well be into it substantively. What differentiates you, Justin, from the other two? Why are you a better candidate?
Well, I take a look at Sam's position, his vote on the cap and trade bill, on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That is the first mandatory cap and trade bill passed in the United States. Sam voted for. I oppose cap and trade at the state and the federal level. The conveyance tax flip-flop was another issue. Sam said 2 years ago he wouldn't vote for the conveyance tax. This year he voted to extend it. So those are two big issues. I have pledged not to raise taxes, not to extend taxes. That ought to be brought down, and I've pledged to fight cap and trade at every level.
Okay, Sam, why don't you respond, and then Mark will, and then I go to a new question with Mark.
Well, why don't you let Mark go, since he'll probably criticize me too, and I can wrap it up.
You can wrap it up. Okay. Mark, why are you the better candidate, and what distinguishes you?
Well, Larry, I'm the only one in this race who's created jobs, hundreds of jobs over 35 years. I've been involved with meeting payroll each and every week. I've been involved with the stress that people on Main Street have to deal with each and every day of their lives, just staying in business. And that includes a Democratic opponent, Chris Murphy. Neither one of my opponents has created a single job. I've been out there creating jobs 35 years, doing the things that are tough, and doing the things in a way that will benefit the constituents of this district. I have the experience to do that.
Okay, Sam Caligieri.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually been endorsed by business organizations. I was one of only 19 candidates nationwide to receive the endorsement of the Business Industry Political Action Organization, which is the oldest pro-business organization in this country. I've been endorsed by CBIA both times that I was in the state Senate. I've got strong credentials on that front, and my record backs that up. This conveyance tax issue that these guys had to pull out of the air because they got to say something to criticize me, if that tax, given the late hour that the Democrats presented it to us, had sunset, property taxes would have gone up in Waterbury and in every other community in the 5th Congressional District, because every community has come to rely on it. So I had to make the tough decision to protect property tax owners and payers throughout the entire 5th District. Talk to any mayor or first selectman, and they'll tell you that they had built a budget around that revenue. I have always supported repealing that and letting it sunset. But when the Democrat majority gives it to you to act on after every municipality in Connecticut has actually adopted their budget, guess what? They've created a fait accompli. And I am a firm opponent to federal cap and trade. I will never support it. The bill that we passed in Connecticut to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is different from the federal bill in a number of very important ways.
Okay, I'm going to have one more round on this because it seemingly has caught the attention of all the candidates, and then I want to get back to Paul in Avon. But Mark, your hand was up. What do you want to say?
Well, it's simply not true that the other towns relied upon it. I've spoken to various towns at various previous members of the Board of Finance. That tax ended June 30th. They had no right to use that revenue starting a July 1 fiscal year in their budgeting for the future. And shame upon them if they did that. Shame upon them if they did that. At some point in time, we have to starve the tax beast and say to the mayors and the first selectmen, do not depend upon the revenue. These folks need relief. They're paying too much in taxes. So that's simply inaccurate.
Okay, Justin Bernier, do you want to say something?
Well, let me just bring it back to something positive, because I don't want the listeners to come away thinking we've been at each other's throats this whole campaign. I mean, nothing can be further from the truth. In fact, we go to events, our wives get along just great, and we do too. But
they'll be on after.
Yeah, that's right. I'm the only candidate in this race with any kind of background in national security, and the economics issues we put front and center in this race, no doubt about it. But we also have to realize that we are still living in an extremely dangerous world. There are huge issues out there, Afghanistan included, and how we're going to treat these veterans when they come back. I have that experience. I have that background as an intelligence officer in the military. I understand what the threat is. I've been overseas serving Afghanistan. I know what the situation is over there. And I'm also able to hold these generals and officials accountable and ask them the tough questions that a lot of people who don't have a military background may not be ready to do.
Okay. Sam Kelliger.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect to Mark, I mean, I'm challenging him right now to find me a first selectman or a mayor who tells you that they didn't build their budget for the next fiscal year, which started on July 1, relying in part on the conveyance tax revenue. Because the reality is, these municipalities had to adopt their budgets before the fiscal year started, and that's why the Democrats put us in a position where they wanted to force us to basically keep that tax in place, because they knew that by calling the vote at the last possible minute, we'd have to face the choice between either letting that sunset, which meant that every city and town that was relying on that revenue, in 06 alone, Waterbury had over $600,000 in conveyance tax revenue in their budget. If that disappears, guess what happens? Your property taxes go up at the local level. So the fact is, I want to find a first selectman or a mayor who says they weren't relying in part on that revenue. Because here's the thing. That's a cheap political shot that ignores the reality that the situation that was created for us would have meant higher property taxes for everybody in the 5th District.
Okay, one more, Mark, and if Sam feels the need, and then I want to move on. Okay.
Town of Avon. Look, this is the problem. The problem is you have to say no to taxes. You have to starve the beast. This is the same political response, and you were taken in by the Democratic ploy to wait till the last minute. I would have voted no.
Look, I was the only person to vote no on the 2007 state budget, because I've learned over the years how important it is for us to be fiscally responsible. I'm the only guy who's ever had to make those tough votes, but you also have to make sure that you're not acting irresponsibly. And a vote that would have meant higher property taxes across the 5th District, including in this region, was an irresponsible vote.
Okay, I'd like to move on to Paul from Avon. We start with Mark Greenberg this time and go down the line. Hello, Paul. Sorry for keeping you so long.
Well, no, it's okay. Thanks for having me. I just have a quick question about cap and trade. A lot of businesses seem to be leaving Connecticut for other states, and I think a large part of this reason is probably cap and trade. And so I just wanted to know specifically what each of the candidates will do to kind of alleviate or reduce this effect. So what can we do to stop this problem?
Well, good question. Cap and trade, of course, is only one of many issues in the state which has led, issues which have led to people and businesses leaving the state, unfortunately. The state is not business friendly. It's not competitive. We're not a competitive state with the other 49 states. We have the second highest utility costs in the United States. So there are a lot of things that we have to do to fix the problem of Connecticut being uncompetitive. That's the first thing we have to do. We have a $3.5 billion budget deficit for next year, and probably larger at the state level. We have to do a lot to change that, otherwise people will flee out of this state, which they're doing right now.
Sam Kelliger.
Yeah, I talked to Kevin Dalgabo, who's the head of the Department of Public Utility Control, to ask him if there have been any rate filings since the greenhouse gas bill that was enacted in 08 came into effect that resulted in higher rate increases, and the answer was no. So the greenhouse gas bill that was enacted by the legislature, in part because of the protections that were in that bill, have never resulted in higher electrical rates in Connecticut, and I've got that directly from the head of the Department of Public Utility Control. The reason our rates are so high in Connecticut is because of how expensive it is to transmit electricity into the state of Connecticut, in part because of the costs that our producers have to pay for natural gas and getting it into Connecticut to fire the plants that they need to produce electricity. That's why we need a comprehensive energy policy that allows us to focus on exploiting as much as possible all of the domestically available resources. We need to look at alternative sources of energy. We need to make sure we make major investments in the transmission infrastructure for natural gas, because that's another area where we have plentiful supply, but where our transmission capacity has been really hurt. So we need a comprehensive energy plan, but this greenhouse gas bill that was enacted several years ago has not resulted in a single increased cost in Connecticut.
Okay, Justin.
Well, I mean, that just shows, and with all due respect, not a good understanding of the long-term economic realities and what this regional greenhouse gas initiative is going to do, because someone's got to pay for those tens of millions of dollars in taxes. And if the rate increases don't go up this year, they will in the future, or the utility companies are not going to be able to reinvest money into the infrastructure that we need in this state to get energy costs down in the long run. So there is money that is being taken out of the system. Eventually, it's going to be pushed over to the consumer, and that's a big, big kitchen table issue. I agree. You know, I think we ought to have an all-the-above energy policy. No doubt about that. I've talked about it. Mark's right. We have the second highest energy costs in the country after only Hawaii. I can think of a lot of things you want to be number 2 to Hawaii in. It's not electricity costs.
Okay, Sam Caligiuri, then Mark Greenberg.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the areas I haven't always agreed with Governor Rowe, but one of the things that I agreed with her on was when she built a protection into the greenhouse gas bill that we're talking about to protect consumers from rate hikes. That was a very important safeguard that gave us comfort, a number of us who supported the bill, and the bill passed overwhelmingly in both chambers. That protection that was in there was an important reason why a number of us got comfortable supporting that bill, because we ought to be cleaning the environment, but we ought to do it in a way that doesn't result in increased costs, which is why I'd be a firm opponent to cap and trade at the federal level.
Okay, Mark Greenberg.
Well, the Americans for Tax Reform has rated the state dead last for 2 years running. September 6th is a date that we've gotten the burden of government off of our backs in the state. And going from door to door to businesses during the day and during the evening, I hear the frustration with people who tell me that their children graduating from college, they're not coming back to Connecticut. They can't find jobs in the state. So cap and trade is just one issue. Utility costs, another issue. There are so many issues that we have to deal with in this state to get this state competitive with our 49 other competitors.
Okay, I'd like to get back to the phones. Bill from Farmington has been waiting for us, and the first response will come from Sam Caligiuri. Bill, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, fire away.
I know it's important for you guys to reach out to the voters with these phone calls and mail and stuff like that, but I was wondering, how do you guys feel about the robocalls? And are you guys going to be using those things this year? Because I think there are a lot of people don't like them. And I was wondering what your position was on political robocalls.
Okay, good question. Thank you, Bill. Sam Caligiuri.
Yeah, they've been an important way of communicating with people. I've supported legislation in the past to eliminate the use of robocalls as long as everybody agrees to abide by that system. But until everybody agrees to abide by that system, I think we have to use every tool that's available to us in order to communicate with voters. I will tell you that I'm very proud. We have a volunteer phone bank that's been going for weeks. We've made well over 10,000 volunteer phone calls, live phone calls with volunteers. That's always infinitely more powerful than any robocall.
Okay. Justin Bernier?
We've actually knocked on 12,000 doors at this point, so we like showing up in person even more. I was the last person in this race to ever put out a robocall, and at that point it was just a survey of people to see if they wanted a lawn sign. Sam very early on did robocalls despite sponsoring a bill to prevent robocalls, and at that time no one in the race had actually had a robocall out. So I just want to be clear on that point. My competitors have used the robocalls extensively. We've used them very sparingly, and that'll be the case because we prefer to make phone calls with real people and door knocks by real people.
Okay, and we want to get to more calls from real people, so Mark, very quickly on this.
Well, I think that we've used the robocalls for Telefora that we've had. We've had 4 of those, and we call registered Republicans in the district. We've actually had 5,000 people on our last Teleforum, which was last night. But I had a flat tire about a week ago, and Bill from Litchfield came to me and said, Mark, you got to stop calling me. Well, I said, I will, Bill, and I took him off the robocall for the Teleforum, but then he proceeded to tell me that he's seen me everywhere and he would vote for me, so I appreciated that.
Okay, Sam, you want to respond to all this?
I was just thinking, I appreciate the gentleman from Farmington's call on robocalls, but there's got to be something much more important to the lives of the people in the 5th District that we could talk about.
Oh, absolutely. This one's going to Justin Bernier from Nick from Waterbury. Nick, we did talk energy. You have something else on your mind.
Well, that's good. You got right into my segue, because here's the bottom line, gentlemen, and I've done my research on this question all over the country. To get the quickest revenue immediately, you're going to have to raise taxes all over the place. I don't see how you can sit there and say we're not going to be able to raise taxes and get all these things done. That's the priority issue. I took it off the internet, and there's 30 states in this union from the federal government right now that are going to be raising taxes to do all these things that you gentlemen are talking about. So you're going to have federal, state, and local taxes. Please expedite on this question.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Well, I appreciate Nick's call, but I got to respectfully disagree with him. Taxes are not the way to get us out of this hole. We need, frankly, to cut spending first and get taxes down so that we can grow our way out of this problem. Right now we're borrowing 50 cents for every dollar the federal government spends. We're not going to be able to cut the federal government 50% in 1 year, as much as some of us may like to. But what we can do is we can do significant cuts to the budget, probably 10 to 20% in the first year. And then what we can do is, by cutting taxes, getting the cost of electricity down, getting the cost of health care down, we can grow our way out of this and get more revenue coming in. That's what President Kennedy did, and that's what Reagan was able to do in the early to mid 80s. And that's what's going to get us out of this hole. In the 1990s, we grew our way out of the debt. We didn't do it through taxes. We grew our way out. We need to grow at 3.5%. And when we do that, you'll see the debt melt away.
Mark Greenberg.
I'd agree with that, what Justin just said. Nick, we cannot raise taxes. That's not the way to do it. We have to cut spending. We have to create an entrepreneurial spirit again in this country, which will create jobs and then create more revenue from it. We have to follow the lead of JFK and Reagan. If we reduce our rates, more income will come in.
Sam Kelleher.
Yeah. Nick, my friend, raising taxes is not the answer. You remember that during the income tax debate, advocates said we had a revenue problem, not a spending problem. All three of us firmly believe we have a spending problem. Raising taxes is counterproductive to economic growth. It took us until early 2008 to finally regain the number of jobs we lost in the early 1990s. That problem was tremendously exacerbated by the institution of the income tax in Connecticut. We need to cut taxes, cut spending, not increase taxes.
Okay, we're going to go to Mark Greenberg, and the question's coming from Bob from Waterbury. We only have about 5 minutes left, so Bob, be quick if you will.
Yes. Would all you candidates support a human life amendment to the Constitution that will protect all of life from fertilization till natural death?
Well, I'm very, very pro-life. I say it at all times, at debates, at RTCs. There's no response other than I'm completely pro-life.
Yes.
Yeah, I support a culture of life, and in order to get such amendment through Congress, we're going to have a change of culture in this country. I go to church on Sundays, a Catholic church, and I don't even hear the priests there talk about abortion. We don't hear it in the communities. It's a very taboo subject, and I think we need to talk about it more in this country in order to get the numbers down and change the culture so that we can get some common sense laws in.
Okay, Max from New Haven. Hi.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for taking my call. As you guys know, schools are laying off teachers because they're facing big deficits. Do you support government spending to save jobs like teachers, cops, and firemen?
Okay, Sam Kelleher.
It depends on the spending, but overall, no, not if it's going to mean deficits and levels of spending that we can't afford. We have to prioritize our spending. We need to make sure that we're spending on functions that are consistent with what the federal government should be doing. Propping up local governments and municipalities is not a core function of the federal government.
Yeah, what the stimulus tried to do, the Obama administration, is use this to pay off municipalities. That's not the way. I want the municipalities to keep more of their money so that they can actually afford to pay for the people that they want to have on the rolls. This idea that we ought to have the government selecting towns and cities that it's going to bail out is bad news. So I oppose using the stimulus for those kind of projects.
Okay, Mark Greenberg.
Well, at the local level, we have to look at the budgets very, very carefully, including the school budgets. In this state, we're losing school children. So what we may have to do is look at each of the classroom sizes and increase them somewhat, and perhaps allow certain people to retire and not hire back teachers. We have to be very, very careful about keeping our property taxes as affordable as possible. And 70 to 75% of town budgets relate to school budgets.
Jack from Wolcott, I think you're going to be the last caller today. Jack, what do you have?
Well, basically, I think you all sound like great people, but I don't think I'm alone when I'm saying that we're just tired of people that are talking about making tough votes and not doing it. How can I trust you guys if you're going to go to Washington to stand up for all of us here in the backroom meetings when you're put under the political pressure to vote one way or the other?
Well, that's a great question. I think that gets to the heart of this political season. I've taken an oath to the Constitution already when I joined the military, and I've lived by that oath. And I'm giving you an oath right now, a pledge that I'm going to vote to support your interest back in the district. I'm going to support the Constitution. I'm going to support lower spending and growth that's going to get this country back so that we're not looking 20 years from now scratching our heads wondering why we didn't do something about it.
Well, I find this is a call to arms for me, and I got involved in this political game in order to go down to do the right thing for the citizens, the right thing for the next generation. I hope to be in Washington for a limited amount of time. I hope that I can make a sufficient change in Washington so that I can come back to my 4 young children and wife. So I'm going to term limit myself to when I can change things and come back.
One of the great strengths I have in this race is I'm the only guy in this race who's actually had to make those tough decisions. You looked at the fact that I was the only senator and the only Republican to stand up and vote no on the 2007-2009 state budget, to the point where one newspaper called me the last sane man in Hartford because of that vote. If you look at the tough contracts that I negotiated when I was acting mayor of Waterbury that started to save millions of dollars for our taxpayers, I'm the only guy in this race who's ever had to withstand the pressure in the public arena of making those tough decisions. That's one of the great strengths I bring to this race, and that's why I have greater credibility on this issue than my good friends who are in this race.
Okay, we only have about a minute to go. I just want to ask a question on behalf of the citizens of Waterbury. Will you retain an office in the city of Waterbury? It's important to the constituents here. Is that something that you would retain if you were a Congressman Mark Greenberg?
Well, I haven't thought about that, Larry, frankly, but I do own property in Waterbury. I find Waterbury is a great city and it has a great future, and I'd definitely like to look upon that as a possibility.
Sam Kelliger.
Waterbury is the largest city in the district. There's always been a 5th District congressional office in Waterbury, and when I'm the congressman, there will continue to be an office in Waterbury.
Most likely, Larry. And, I think we need to go with mobile offices, in fact, because we have 41 towns in the district, and we've had fights over the years about where these offices are going to be. I would like to see mobile offices the way the DMV does it, so that we can have office hours in every single town in the district, not just 1 or 2.
Okay, that is it. We are done for the hour, but very good. Everybody kept to it. I really appreciate it. A very lively and interesting exchange. Thank you to the callers, and we will have open lines in just a moment here on 1320 WATR, and I thank you all for coming in. Thank you to CTN.